Hello. Hi, I'm Simon Esler. Welcome to the festival. I'm so glad to be kicking things off. I am here today to talk to you about the family unit, the traditional family unit, the war on the family. And I want to start off by just giving you a sense of who I am and where I'm coming from with this information. So 8 years ago, I started my own family. And there was the normal challenges of becoming a father, and some of the things that were challenging to me I decided to research, and I looked into the science of fatherhood and found all sorts of interesting discoveries. But what really pressured me to dig deeper was actually when the lockdowns hit. And there was this pressure for families to stay together in the same space and endure all this stress together. And I realized the pressure that was being put on the normal traditional family unit and what that meant. So as I started to look more deeply into this, I remembered a series of documents that I had read called the Toronto Protocols. Now, these are allegedly documents of a secret set of meetings that occurred in downtown Toronto in 1967 and 1985. And this meeting describes the plans of a group that called themselves the 666. So they self-identified as somewhat satanic. They called themselves global financiers who had a lot of power in the world. And in this series of meetings, they described their war against humanity in great detail. It's essentially a map of the war that was going to be waged on the Western world using things like communism and transhumanism, using social engineering of all different types. So, as I was studying the Toronto Protocols in the context of what was happening during the lockdowns and the entire context of the pandemic, I started to see a pattern. I started to see what was being described in these plans to enslave humanity towards a new world order, and it paralleled with so much of what was unfolding through the entire way by which the pandemic was being allegedly managed. And so, what I found was that one of the primary targets of this group, who call themselves the 666, was the traditional family unit. And they overtly stated in these documents that the only way we can implement a new world order is if the family falls, is if the stability of the family is no longer. And so, as I researched further, I found that they had specific warfare tactics targeting the mother, targeting the father, and targeting the children. And they outlined these tactics in great detail and the operations that these tactics made up. So, after I got deep into the Toronto Protocols and started to get a sense of this actual plan to enslave humanity in greater detail and the way that it impacted the family, I started to look at my family more deeply and wanted to better understand what is the family and why are they so threatened by it? And what came up for me was this concept of the family, the mother, the father, and the child as a superorganism. And the purpose of that superorganism in human evolution, not just biologically, but spiritually and psychologically. And I found some really, really incredible information. Now, I've outlined all of this information in much greater detail than I can in my 20-minute presentation today in a docu-series I created called Superorganism, and I highly recommend you check that out. I'll get more on that later, but for today, I want to focus on this concept of what I call the devotion key. Because what I found was that family devotion is not just a social construct, it's not just a cultural notion, it's not even just a religious idea. There's actually biology that drives us towards family devotion, and it serves a great purpose. So, the Haudenosaunee people talk about living now for the seventh generation. They talk about blending your experience in the present with the knowledge of the past, of ancestors, of lives lived so far. And they talk about blending your present time experience with this past knowledge and then sending it as far into the future as possible. And the more I research the family, the more I realize that the family is a kind of superorganism that is beautifully designed to contain human knowledge and wisdom and cast it as far into the future as possible. Literally, what I discovered was that stable families over many generations are incredible containers for information to be maintained in a very coherent way, for the integrity of information and wisdom to be maintained. So let me get a little bit deeper into what I mean by that and what I found. So there's a psychologist named Richard Schwartz, and he was the promoter of a system of therapy called family systems therapy. And it was about how the family is a dynamic system in which emotions and energies are exchanged within the system, and each individual takes on a different role within that dynamic. And so one family member may take on stress more than other family members, and one family member being sick might make the family system degraded in a certain way, or there might be the health of one family member that contributes to the family in a certain way. And so his whole therapy practice was based on families being seen as systems. But later on in his work, what he discovered was what he called internal family systems, which was this idea that the family system we grow up in some ways reflects into us in like a fractal way, and that we end up having parts inside of us that talk to each other much in the way that our family system interacted, and that there's a relative fractal inside of us of the family that we grew up in. So I found that fractals became a theme the more deeply I went into this research. So not only did his research show that a fractal of your family lives inside of you in the way that you end up sorting through the world and dealing with challenges and living with the contradictions inside of yourself. Some of the contradictions inside of you may be based on the family system you grew up in. But I found two other fractal systems within the family design and the family as a superorganism. One was that when a mother is carrying a girl, at 4 months old, that girl fetus already has her eggs formed. So the eggs for the next generation have formed inside that fetus. And so what we have is a fractal system. We have the next generation nested inside already. Now, there's a number of things to consider here that make this really important, because the mother's heart field, the coherence of her heart field, is feeding the development of that baby on a lot of levels, in the ways that that baby's brain develops, in the way that their prefrontal cortex develops, their capacity for empathy and socialization. A lot of this has to do with the coherence generated by the mother's heart field. But we want to recognize that if a baby girl is growing inside that mother, then the eggs inside her are also being impacted by the mother's state of being and her experience. And literally, like when the mom smells a flower, when she has a moment of love with another human being, the cascade of endorphins and all of that are being experienced by that fetus, which is very notable considering the kind of transhumanist push that's going on right now with things like Ectolife, which is a new baby factory where they're looking to clone babies and have people design them genetically. And they claim that the fake fetus that they've developed imitates the mother perfectly for developing babies, which is just false given the deep connections that actually unfold with mothers and babies. The other fractal that I found was that we have a nested fractal system unfolding with the baby itself and the cells of the baby leaving the actual space of the womb. So what I found in my research was that the cells of a baby will actually travel throughout the mother's whole body and go towards the mother's organs. And one of the studies that showed the impact of this incredible movement of the child's DNA throughout the mother's body was a study on mothers who experienced heart attacks. And the heart attacks in these mothers would heal completely over 50% of the time, some of them within 2 weeks. And they found in the studies that this was because the baby's cells were rushing to the mom's heart and actually healing the mom's heart at super speed. So not even her DNA, the DNA of her child heals her heart. Incredible. And so these sort of fractal versions of the child travel throughout the mother's body and defend her, act in a way that shows devotion. So we have this incredible science showing us that the baby's body devotes itself to the mother. Now, we also find in this research that the mother is so programmed to devotion, that the mother's desire to devote herself to her child is so incredibly powerful that in the experiments where they tried to isolate where this functioned in mammals, they actually couldn't figure out where it was because they couldn't find a way to stop it. What I mean by that was that they tested on female rats. and they would take away their sense of smell, they would zap certain parts of their brain, they would degrade their functionality, and no matter what they did, they couldn't take away the mother rat's devotion to the child. So this is deep in the mother's biology. It's also in the child's biology, in the way that their cells start protecting the mother's life and stay with the mother for life. Even after birth, the child's cells stay in the mother and live in her organs in a protective sort of guardianship. It's very, very beautiful. But the other thing that I found was that the biology of the father really reveals the family superorganism at work. So, what happens when a father is devoted to a pregnant woman is that he starts to become receptive to the biofield being emitted by the mother's pregnant body. And it actually starts to reprogram the father's body. What they found was that a devoted father who's present during the process of the pregnancy, his progesterone levels will change, his testosterone levels will change, his appetite will change. And so, with something like testosterone changing, the emotional landscape of that man is going to change based on him being devoted to the mother. But the other really incredible thing is that the alteration of something like progesterone in the father, what they found was that after the child is born, these alterations in the father's biochemistry made him more devoted to the child by making his brain more receptive to things like the child's cries. So what we have is a perfect example of the superorganism through this devotion key. That what's going on is that the father devotes himself to the mother and he becomes receptive to the mother's biology. And the mother's biology creates a connection between the father and the child so that after birth, the father and the child have a bond, but he needs the mother's body to do this. So on a deep, deep biological level, devotion is something that we are evolutionarily driven towards. Why is this important? Because there is a massive, massive war on the family, on the traditional family unit that is ongoing right now. If we look from the vantage point of the Toronto Protocols and these documents about the war on humanity, well, we see that for them, it's an obstacle to the New World Order. But there's more to it than that, because we have never, as far as I understand, as a society, used knowledge like this, which we've had for decades, about the family, about what happens when a man and a woman create a family together. We haven't embedded it into our culture. We haven't explored ideals that honor and respect the traditional family form. And in not producing that as a culture, we have weakened ourselves as a species because it has allowed us to be attacked and for the stability of family to be undermined. Now, this is especially important because families contain wisdom in a way that I really didn't truly understand when I began my research for this docuseries. When you think of something like a mother who meditates regularly and the coherent field that her heart generates, informing the development of a child inside of her womb, that's the kind of knowledge that is being passed on intimately between the mother and the child. And then when we look at the way that the father's biology and the mother's biology are interacting and creating that connection for the father to depend upon later after the birth, there's information being passed on there as well. There's subtle biological, almost etheric information that is being passed on through the union of man and woman. Now, none of this is to discount or disregard non-traditional family units. That wasn't at all my intention, and I still don't believe that. I know lots of families who don't take the traditional form, and that's fine. But what this is about is knowing what we have been blessed with as a species and knowing how to carry information as far into the future as possible. And one of the best ways to carry wisdom into our future generations is through utilizing the beautiful system we have in the family. And so if we know that as a culture, if we uplift this knowledge as a culture, then even when someone forms a family that is non-traditional, even if you have a same-sex couple or if you have a child being raised by their grandparents, it's still important information because we know then what is missing, what needs to be compensated for, how do we most effectively make up for that difference from what we have evolved towards. that um, we have fertility plummeting on Earth. Okay? There's a struggle to produce babies that's happening at an accelerated rate. And this struggle is probably going to continue. This is the perfect time for us to truly know what it means to pass on knowledge in the most effective way, to pass on love in the most effective way, and to do that through using the evolution, the millions of years of evolution that is embedded within the traditional family unit, is a very wise choice right now if we're looking at the horizon of the human story right now and the chaos that is unfolding. We want to be able to endure that chaos. We want to be able to take all the beautiful knowledge and wisdom that this chaos is generating, and we want to be able to pass it on to the best of our ability. Because times of struggle and chaos is when we have the chance to gather the most wisdom. It's when we are blessed to be able to transmute life's difficulties into the lessons that humanity needs to build something more glorious in the future. And so all of us right now are evolving rapidly, are taking on the challenge of this great awakening that's unfolding and using it to transform who we are. But we don't want that to fall into a vacuum. We want that to continue in the human story, and we want it to be able to weather the storm that is ongoing on Earth right now. And so to honor this, I think, is more important than people can understand. And one of the final things I want to point to is that within the family system, what I discovered was that the child's role is essential in that the child brings forward innocence. And innocence is something that needs to be protected for a very, very practical reason. That innocence is the space in which knowledge from the past can be blended with novel and new experiences of the present. Because children have innocence, and they're very open and they're very unconditioned, their innocence is the space where new knowledge and new wisdom is born and blended with the old. And there is a war going on innocence right now. There is a war on children. There is a cultural war to stop children from maintaining their innocence as they develop. And so I want to point this out because the war on children and the war on innocence is actually the war on human wisdom and our capacity to not only protect the old wisdom that we need to preserve from our human story, but to blend it into new wisdom and new understandings. And so the war on children is one of the places where even people who haven't formed their own family, who don't even have children, they can work to protect children culturally in their community. They can get involved. I'm working with a group called Mom Army and helping found a group called Dad Army right now. Please look us up on Instagram. We're doing a lot of on the ground work, campaigning, legal work to defend children and their innocence. And so for me, a lot of this comes down to the family system and to our ability to protect children. And I believe that a healthy, strong, stable family is the ideal way for a child's innocence to be guarded so that knowledge can be given to them and preserved, and so that we can repeat that process and use this system of nested fractals and family devotion that is built into us so deeply to make sure that 7 generations from now, wisdom that we have gathered in this life can be cast to them, to that 7th generation, to the people of our future. So this is, I think, some of the most important knowledge today. I think people need to take it very, very seriously and fight back. If you want to know more about my work, please go to simonesler.com. You can check out my new series, Superorganism, at dauntlessdialogue.com. Please come follow me on Instagram and all my social media, which you can find on my website. And feel free to hit me up and chat about this issue because I'm very, very passionate about protecting the family and protecting children. And please give Mom Army and Dad Army a follow on Instagram because we're doing amazing work and we have a huge network of people lined up to just change the whole game and fight back and raise human consciousness by raising up the family and protecting children. Thank you.